No problem.
So we're just admitting everybody into the meeting, so just bear with us and we'll start. Just to let you all know that we are recording this webinar. Got a few more people joining. We've had a really good uptake, so thanks all for coming.
38. What? The number of people. I can't see it.
And then I think we just need to mute those who are not speaking. Okay, I'm going to make a start because I'm conscious that we've got an hour. So just to welcome everybody to this inquest webinar on the Family Listening Day. And thank you all for making the time at lunch. Just to say, the format will be that you'll hear from the panelists on the screen, and then there will be an opportunity for questions, and within the Teams function there is the chat function where you can ask questions and we'll share them out amongst the panelists. And we have a really fantastic panel of family campaigners and a barrister, Pete, who's the architect really of the original bill on Hillsborough law. My name's Deborah Coles. I'm the Director of Inquest, and we've been working closely with Hillsborough Law now on Hillsborough Law, and we set up the Family Listening Day, which brought together a cross-section of 23 people who've experienced deaths, harms and injustice by state and corporate bodies. And that ranged across decades to the present day. And those families who attended have campaigned for justice for decades at great personal cost. The Family Listening Day is a model that Inquest uses to enable families to speak truth to power and for their testimony and recommendations for change to be put on the public record and in a report to help drive the cultural and policy changes that are so needed. And this day was commissioned by the Ministry of Justice to help inform their work on Hillsborough law. And I want to just do a massive thank you to those who attended, but also to Chris Tully for writing what is an extremely powerful report. Rosanna, I don't know if the slides are already up there, but just to say that for those who haven't seen the report, it's available on our website. If you can just put the second slide up. And you will understand as this webinar goes on why the title of the report is All or Nothing. We see the report's publication as the starting point for the lobbying and campaigning for systemic change across the inquest and inquiry process and how people facing death and injustice are treated. If you can put the next slide up, please. What was really clear from the day was how the injustices that the Hillsborough families and survivors faced, the lies, the victim blaming, the delay, denial, defensiveness, and the absolute hostility from those responsible are still being faced by so many going through the inquest and inquiry process. An inquest sees that played out daily in our work. This defensive culture, and crucially, the lack of candour, is the default position in response to state wrongdoing. Organisations more concerned with reputation management and covering up than learning and seeking improvements. You can give me the next slide, please. Families talked about this culture of defensiveness and hostility, problems with disclosure, with funding, with the scope and quality of investigations. One describing how it's a cruel, cruel system we've got, the emotional abuse that they inflict on us. You have the next slide, please. Also, how time is being used as a tool to delay and deny justice and compensation, and the stark inequality of arms between the state and bereaved people. Have the next slide. Our immediate focus with Hillsborough law now is on securing a Hillsborough law that, as the report's title says, is all or nothing. There was a unified call for Hillsborough law to be enacted in its entirety, and Pete will discuss some of the current challenges we're facing on this. But the principles here are fundamental in starting a process where people learn to be truthful, and the importance of sanctions that underpin the Hillsborough law. Hillsborough law is our immediate priority, but the report and its findings is a damning indictment of the way families are treated after a death or injustice. And there were a series of other recommendations of vital importance to trying to effect change. If you can put the next slide up, Rosanna, please. These are some of the recommendations, and a couple I'll just draw out. One being the need for a national oversight mechanism to ensure that recommendations that come out of inquests and inquiries have proper oversight and are enacted. And this is a campaign that's being driven by a coalition of families and other campaign groups. Other recommendations included having timelines for inquests and inquiries, proper evaluation of the inquest and inquiry process. And of course, the point that came up again at the day was around proper equality of arms in terms of access to non-means tested public funding for representation. This report, in our view, should be read by all those involved in investigation processes after deaths, harms, and injustice. An inquest will work alongside families to drive the changes that are so needed to ensure that the response to contentious deaths and grave injustice improves. The evidence is too compelling and too stark to ignore, and to do so would be an absolute failure on the part of this government. And the report, as I said, is stark, but it's also a really good insight into the experiences that are being faced by people up and down the country on a daily basis. And we owe it to them, and we owe it to all those who've been campaigning for decades to ensure that the report actually gets taken on board, both in terms of changing culture, but also policies and practices. So we're in a really good position today to be able to hear from some of those people who've been instrumental in driving the change. And I'm going to turn now to Margaret Aspinall, who's here with Sue Roberts. And Margaret has been a relentless campaigner around Hillsborough and is absolutely essential in terms of showing why this bill is so important. So Margaret, I'm going to hand over to you. Margaret, you're on mute. You just need to unmute. I don't think we can unmute you, can we?
There you go.
Oh, there we
Can you
are.
hear me now?
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
Right, Margaret, over
No,
to you.
that's fine, Deb. Thank you. I agree with everything that you've said there, and I think you put them points across very, very well. But I'm sure everybody understands where I stand over the Hillsborough law. It wasn't just about Hillsborough. Cover-ups have been going on pre-Hillsborough. And to me, that's a disgrace. It's been going on, as I've said, pre-Hillsborough. But to put the families through what the families had to go through for all of these years is an absolute disgrace. All Mr. Starmer has to do is the right thing. And the right thing is, main points to me are equality of arms. That is so important for the ordinary people. They should not have to go out fundraising for an injustice through the fault of the state and people who should have been protecting them. That should never, ever happen. I've always said bad laws are there to be broken. I've recently had somebody getting in touch with me to do something for the Summerland. Now, I know in the Isle of Man, it's a different law to our law. But if we change things here, we're hopefully changing it for an example for others to do this exactly the same. Now, the Summerland have been refused to have a legal inquiry. And to me, that's an absolute disgrace. We are all innocent people. The people who are in this group, as Peter's told me many a time, and we all understand, there's so many people who've had an injustice, like, you know, the contaminated blood, Grenfell, the arena bombing. There's so many of them have all had an injustice. And why have they had that injustice? Because people like us have allowed them to get away with it and done nothing about it. You've heard the saying, power to the people. The people do have the power if we all stick together and we all sing from the same hymn sheet. That is so important, because families, as the Hillsborough families, we weren't only trying to deal with our grief at that time. We were having to go out cap in hand for the ordinary people to help us, to fund, to fight a cause. Now, if they hadn't helped us, the ordinary people, we would never have achieved what we did achieve. And I am proud of what the families achieved. But we didn't achieve it alone. We achieved it because of everybody who helped us. And I am talking also about certain MPs who've been so supportive. The likes of our lawyers who are still supportive, as some of them are here today, are so supportive. Without them and yourself and people like you, Debbie, we'd have got nowhere. And we changed things. I was getting told in the very early days, and Sue's here at the side of me to tell me I'm telling the truth. You'll never, and this is from an expert, by the way, there's no chance you're ever going to change them 96 verdicts, even though we know now it's 97. You have no chance. We wouldn't have had a chance if we'd have given up. But we didn't give up. We persisted. And I am so grateful to the likes of Theresa May, who, when I went to see her when she was the Home Secretary at the time, I went to see her, I had that meeting with her, and she was absolutely amazing. And she'd done the right thing. When I asked for funding to help the families for the second inquest, I got it. When I asked her to put a cap on the police funding, she put a cap on it. And I am so grateful for that. So there's so many things that families had to go through. The lies, the cover-ups, deceitfulness. The Prime Minister knows where I stand on all of this now, because I had a meeting with him about 3 weeks ago, and I told him straight, I will not accept the Hillsborough law watered down. I want it in all its entirety. If that doesn't happen, we organise a press conference and let the world know that we do not accept it if you cannot do the right thing. What is the right thing? The right thing is what you were talking about before, Deb, what the families have been talking about for all of these years, and what Pete, Andy Byrne, Steve Rotherham, there's so many of them who stood by us. But we have to stay together, we have to stay strong, and let them know we don't go away. We're there until a proper Hillsborough law is in place in all its entirety. We have to do it, and we will do it if we carry on the way we are. You want to say anything, Sue?
No.
Thanks, Margaret, as ever. Thank you so much. And I just think, you know, you're an inspiration for all of us, really, in terms of the way that you have been so much behind this, but also so much of your life has been devoted to trying to get justice. We're going to hear now from Pete Weatherby, KC, who was the original architect of the bill back in 2017. And he's going to give us an overview of what some of the challenges are with the current way in which the government is approaching this. Pete.
Thanks, Deb, and thanks very much, Margaret and Sue, for that really important start to where we are today. I mean, the two messages are very clear: all or nothing, which is the headline of the Family Listening Day report. We mustn't back off or allow them to water down Hillsborough law, and I'll come to that in a minute. And the other thing, Margaret, that you were saying a minute ago, that we must stay together. If we stay together, then we can drive this forward and we can get it through. One of the things the government are trying to do is they're trying to pick us off and talk to one or the other and trying to see whether there's some way in to water it down. So I am one of the campaigners. I am one of the lawyers, as has been said. I represented many of the Hillsborough families. I currently lead the team representing the COVID bereaved, and I've represented other bereaved families, Manchester Arena, Grenfell, and many others. And I'm also a trustee of Inquest. I did lead the team, although lots of other lawyers and other people helped draft Hillsborough law. But it was very much under instruction from the families, and that's really important, that this isn't just a bunch of lawyers drafting this. It was under clear instructions from the families. And I've taken part with many others, including Margaret and Sue and Charlotte and other family members on the group in advocating for it up and down the country. Also in recent times, I and others have been involved in multiple meetings with ministers and the Attorney General. I've also spoken to the Prime Minister, albeit briefly, regarding getting it enacted. And all of the conversations start with the fact that the Prime Minister promised to pass Hillsborough law, the actual Hillsborough law, the Public Authority Accountability Bill 2017, giving it its official name. He promised that publicly and clearly in 2022. Regrettably, it's become a Hillsborough law, but we must hold feet to the fire and not have a Hillsborough law, whatever that means. It doesn't mean anything, of course, and we must hold him to his promise. But it's important to note that Hillsborough law isn't an aspirational draft. It is this actual bill. It's been tested and tested again by academics, lawyers, by judges. It's been tested in practice. The provisions of it were used extensively in the UEFA international review of the 2022 Champions League near disaster. It works. And the fact it works is why there is such opposition to it by powerful people who it would affect. So it's the legacy project of the Hillsborough family, but it commands the support of just about all bereaved family campaigns, all those affected by post office, infected blood scandals. And why? Sadly, that's because the same issues arise in all of these cases, that public servants and institutions put themselves and their reputations before telling the truth and before accountability. The upshot of that is, as a country, we waste huge amounts of public money on overlong inquests and inquiries, simply because public bodies and public officials are not compelled to proactively assist and tell the truth. Hillsborough law would shorten those processes. It would require officials and public bodies to own up to failures, and with backstop criminal sanctions if they try not to. Swifter justice for families and those affected by official failures would facilitate real change and do it quicker. It would prevent reoccurrence of circumstances which lead to disasters. And in doing so, as I say, it would save huge amounts of public money. It would mean major culture change. It would its effect should not be underestimated. So the three things it does: it establishes a legal duty of candour, an enforceable provision to require all public servants to tell the truth at all times in their jobs, compliance through training and codes, but with an essential backstop criminal sanction to make sure it properly works, and without applying it across the board and at all times, and with the criminal backstop. If willfully ignored, it simply doesn't work. And secondly, Hillsborough law contains a number of provisions to make the duty of candour practical and effective in official investigations, including inquests and inquiries. And without that supporting duty, lawyers for public bodies and officials will find ways to get around it. So again, that must be backed up by criminal sanctions. And thirdly, as Margaret alluded to earlier, a level playing field. Bereaved families at inquests and inquiries. I mean, it's well known that there wasn't any provision for Hillsborough families at the original inquests, whereas all of the public bodies, those responsible for the 97 deaths, were fully lawyered at your expense, at public expense. And that's a scandal of itself. And that today remains the case for a very wide range of cases that inquest and others deal with, where state bodies which may have caused or contributed to deaths have fully lawyered teams at your expense, at public expense, whilst the families have no resources whatsoever. So going back to the beginning, just to conclude, the Prime Minister publicly stated in 2022 that Hillsborough law would be one of the first things that he did on being elected. No one understood that promise as anything other than passing the actual bill. It had its first reading in 2017, but since being elected, unfortunately, his government has set about replacing it. On the 24th of March, they gave me, and only me, a read through of their replacement draft. In laughable circumstances, they put me in the Cobra rooms below the Cabinet Office, wouldn't let me take a note of it, wouldn't give me a copy of it. But none of the three pillars that I've just described, none of them are in their replacement draft. Since then, the Cabinet Office have been briefing against Hillsborough law. They've been saying anonymously, of course, and we know it's ministers, we know who it is, we know what they've said, but they've been briefing senior journalists that Hillsborough law would criminalise junior civil servants who lie about turning into work late. Well, that is simply not true. Nobody who's read the Hillsborough law bill could possibly honestly say that. Hillsborough law is about stopping the misleading of the public. It's not about civil servants who make mistakes. It's not about minor white lies about being late for work. That is pure scaremongering. More recently, we had a further very long meeting with ministers and with the Attorney General. And unfortunately, the government appears to be leading up to a further replacement bill. This time, it doesn't appear that they're going to be sharing it with us. So the first we see of it may be when they put it before the House. We don't know when, but we think it may be sometime in July, possibly late July. The indications from those discussions are that it will be little better than the original, the 24th of March replacement bill. They appear to be focused on packaging it to be able to present it as a Hillsborough law, but to make it a replacement bill which doesn't deliver anything in the actual Hillsborough law. All very depressing. But just finally, there is huge support. There is huge support in Parliament. And if all of us get together with the MPs that support us, then we can drive this through. And I would say that all or nothing, everyone sticks together. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Pete. And I'm sure there'll be some questions. And just a reminder, people, please put some questions in the chat because we haven't got a single question yet. And I'm sure there are questions you all have. I'm delighted now to introduce Lobby Akinola from the COVID-19 Families for Justice campaign and somebody who participated in the Family Listening Day. Lobby, thanks.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. As Deb said, I'm Lobby. I'm a member of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, and I lost my father to COVID in April of 2020. Because of that loss, I got involved with this campaign, which called for the public inquiry into the government's response to COVID, which we see playing out before us now on our screens. And as a campaign, we wanted to get involved with the Hillsborough Law and campaign for it because, as Margaret and Pete have said, it really is an all or nothing bid. We have to be united in calling for justice because I personally believe that, unfortunately, our government has forgotten its duty and who that duty is to. It's their responsibility to look for the best outcomes for the British public. And instead, we see in numerous inquests and inquiries, they're spending our money to protect themselves. And I think that the Hillsborough Law is the foundation of upturning this system that is, oppressing all of us, really. I think when I look at it through the lens of the COVID inquiry, we've all already seen how important the Hillsborough Law would be, whether it's WhatsApp messages that disappeared off phones or people claiming that they did the best they could, put protective rings around care homes. The number of lines that we've heard come out of the inquiry, which are just demonstrably untrue, is uncountable. And then we hear from the people who are on the front lines, the people who risked their lives, the people who lost loved ones. And we can hear in their pain and in their testimony just how untrue all of those statements are. And we could save time and could save the public's money if it was imperative that the government officials and everyone involved with these inquiries had to tell the truth. And it seems ridiculous that we have to codify in law that you tell the truth, but this is where we are. And we see that it isn't just party specific, We're here talking about this because Keir Starmer has gone back on a promise he made. He promised that he would deliver Hillsborough Law in full, and that is not what's happening currently. So I think it's important that the Hillsborough Law comes in and puts into structure so that irrespective of who is in charge, the British public will get the truth. Because it's only by getting the truth that we are able to build for a better tomorrow. If we spend our time and energy navigating lies and trying to piece apart what's real, what isn't, we risk future lives, From my perspective of the COVID inquiry, we're being told constantly by scientists and experts that there will be another pandemic, there will be times of crisis again. And if we don't take this opportunity to learn from what's gone wrong now, because we're wasting time trying to identify whether or not it's true that there was a lack of PPE, whether or not it's true that hospitals were overrun, then the next time that disaster comes, we wouldn't know how to respond. So, I'm here to represent the inquiry and vehemently raise our voice with everyone to demand that it is an all or nothing Hillsborough Law, that the government recognizes the promises that it made and to make good on them, and also to ensure that the Hillsborough Law is the next step that we take in achieving justice for all of us. Because, as I said at the beginning, this isn't just for the people affected now in this room. This is for future generations and everyone around the country. We don't know when injustice is going to strike, and we need to make sure that we are all protected by making sure that we're all speaking with one voice about it. Thank you very much.
Lobby, thank you so much. And I think that will have resonated with lots of people on this webinar. And our last speaker before we open up for a kind of panel discussion and questions is Charlotte Hennessy, another formidable campaigner for justice, and somebody who also attended the Family Listening Day, and who many of you will have heard as a very passionate campaigner for Hillsborough Law. Charlotte.
Thanks, Deb. So for those who don't know, I am the daughter of Jimmy Hennessy, who was killed at Hillsborough. When he died, I was 6, and I'm now 43 years old and still campaigning, you know, for the wrongs to be put right, if you like. I think one thing that I wanted to highlight specifically today is that we've been campaigning for this law for 9 years. After the inquests concluded, myself, along with others, was asked to go along to a meeting with Pete and our solicitor then, Elkin, and the Hillsborough law was discussed and proposed, and, you know, Pete asked us, would you support it? Naturally, you know, I was just like, yeah, of course. And the whole reason behind that is because you never want anybody to ever go through anything that you've been through. So I feel like lately the government are acting like we've just appeared out of nowhere and dumped this Hillsborough law on their desk. And that's not the case at all. This has been going on for 9 years. So the fact that, you know, it's been proposed, it's been spoken about in Parliament on multiple occasions. The fact that now we're at a stage where, you know, pledges have been withdrawn, delays have been put in place, and amendments are now needed to happen is even more frustrating, because there have been many, a person, you know, Prime Minister before Keir Starmer, that has had the opportunity to read over it. So when Keir pledged the Hillsborough law, he knew exactly what he was pledging to, because it's been around for 9 years. And at the Hillsborough listening event, there were civil servants in presence, as well as bereaved, you know, family members, campaigners from lots of different groups. And at the end of that meeting, I actually said, on behalf of everyone that was there, really, I made it very clear to civil servants that their duty is to provide services to the public and work in a politically impartial way and uphold the values of integrity, honesty, objectivity and impartiality. And I made it very clear that if they left that listening event after hearing all of the awful stories of things that people have been put through, you know, and some of them are, you think that you've heard it all as you've gone along over the years, but some of the ways that people have been treated are appalling. And I made it clear to all the civil servants present, if after listening to all of these people today, you still walk out of here and try to rewrite this Hillsborough law, it would not only go against all of their duties, but it would damage the very little faith that a majority of us have in the establishment left as it is. And that's exactly what they did. They walked out of that room and they've tried to rewrite the Hillsborough law, going against all of their values and all of their duties. And we are now at a stage where the government are almost giving in to the very people that this law is supposed to protect us against. Civil servants are trying to take out the parts that don't suit them. And I say to them, only people that fear the truth fear this Hillsborough law. So if you're fearing the truth and you're trying to amend that duty of candour, then you're in the wrong profession and you shouldn't be representing the way that you are, because that's not what you're there to do. And, you know, I feel like we're at a very, very frustrating part now, you know, where we are being kept in the dark. As it was highlighted earlier, that we're not going to be permitted to see this rewritten draft. Why? Because they fear us, because they know that we are not fools. We are not going to stand for some chocolate fire guard version of a Hillsborough law. We want the Hillsborough law in its entirety. Again, it's been around for 9 years. It was well written right from the very beginning. The proposals ensure a positive and an effective change to ensure that people, you know, aren't pushed aside, that victims aren't treated like the criminals. As Margaret said before, why should you have to go out and fundraise and campaign when you are the victim? We haven't done anything wrong. Why am I now sitting here using my lunch break to have to, you know, speak about this issue again? And it's quite frankly because the people on this call have got morals, and we are the ones with the integrity, and we are the ones that are standing, you know, within objectivity and impartiality, because we want to put wrongs the rights. And I, you know, I really do question, you know, what the issue is, what is the delay, and how much longer is this going to be denied? I feel that Keir Starmer really now needs to act upon his pledge. He's got a really massive opportunity to put right a lot of wrongs. And I think, you know, if he wants to restore faith, and he wants to be a man of integrity, then he needs to ensure the Hillsborough law in its entirety, because that is what he pledged, that is what he signed up to. And he really did know the contents of the Hillsborough law when he stood at those Labour Party manifestos. That was what he was pledging. He wasn't pledging a redrafted version with the parts taken out that the civil servants don't quite like anymore. He pledged it in its entirety. And I just think we really need to be banging that drum, standing together like we all, you know, we always have done. We cannot now let our voices be silenced. We've never been silent. We will not stand for anything other than what has been promised. And yeah, I just think, you know, strength in numbers, as they say. We've come this far, and let's not back down at the last hurdle. So, and thanks very much to everyone who does continue to bang the drum along with us, because we know that 36 years of Hillsborough alone is a very long time, and you know that doesn't even put into concept the timescales that others have campaigned for either, and it is very much so appreciated.
Charlotte, thank you. As ever, extremely powerful words, and I was quite struck by what you said about, you know, you think you know everything. You've been a long-term campaigner, but I think all of us who attended the Family Listening Day were shocked by some of what we heard, even those of us who hear difficult things on a daily basis. So I think you've all given a really, really, really important context, and I think the ask some questions, and there's some comments. I think everybody can see. My understanding is everybody can see the chat. Something from Lucy Easthorpe here around civil servants not seeing this as their duty. I think that was in response to what you and Pete were saying. I'm going to talk at the end about things that people can do to keep the pressure, and Naomi's talking about the criminal backstop, the sanctions, which is so important. So I think I'm going to go just in terms of pulling out some of the themes. One of the things I'd just like to ask a question about, Hillsborough law. One of the things that we think Hillsborough law could do is actually address some of the delays that are so endemic in the current system. And it would just be good to hear from you about your experience of delays, but also Pete, I think it's probably an opportunity to touch on why we think that Hillsborough Law is so important for as a foundation, and Lobby, you talked about this, you know, as a foundation for changing the current system, and it would just be quite good just to hear that, because some of the obstacles that we keep hearing about from government, I think need to be unpicked. So Pete, do you want to just mention the issue about how you think Hillsborough Law can actually make things better?
Well, I think, thanks, Deb. Just very briefly, it's drafted to be intensely practical. One of the really key things and one of the really important things is that Hillsborough Law would require all of the stakeholders, I know that's a dreadful word, but all of the public bodies involved in an incident. So let's take Southport, for example, the forthcoming inquiry at Southport. As I understand it, there are all sorts of state bodies involved, from the security services, the police, the social services, etc., etc. And it would require them all at the outset, at the earliest point, to provide what is called a position statement. So they would have to set out in brief at the start what they say is their narrative of what went wrong, or what went right, and if they want to do that as well. And that would then direct the inquiry as to what it needs to look at. The inquiry wouldn't have to accept what was in the position statement, far from. But again, going back to the UEFA inquiry, we did that, and we sent requests for position statements with 27 or 30 stakeholders, and we got replies from most of them. And that led to the whole thing being delivered within 7 months. Now, you know, the Hillsborough inquiries, the fresh Hillsborough inquiries, were in court for 2 years, never mind all the preparation. And so Hillsborough Law would deliver justice much quicker, because it would force all of the public bodies and corporations to come to the table at the start and to provide their narrative at the outset, which of course can be picked apart. But it would mean that inquiries don't have to look at haystacks full of evidence, but they would look for the needles within them. So that's just one example of that, Deb.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here from Elkin, and I think the question is primarily about, can you explain why you think the government is so opposed to the law? Who'd like to? I think, Charlotte, you touched on this, and well, in fact, you've all touched on this about you know, organisations trying to hide the truth. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I do think that it ultimately the duty of candour seems to be the biggie. You know, the one that they're most frightened about. And I feel like there seems to have been a lot of talk back and forth regarding the duty of candour, of, you know, oh well, it will mean this, and it will put, you know, it will put this at risk, or, you know, and Pete has been able to say, well, no, actually you're wrong, you know. And so for me, I think it is that the duty of candour, and it reverts back to those that fear the truth, isn't it?
Yeah. Margaret, Lobby, do you want to say something here?
Well, yeah, I'd like to add a little bit more to this, because why a Hillsborough Law is so important. It's not just about the duty of candour, but when you go back and you look at our second inquest, Debbie, Duckenfield, 97 people were unlawfully killed. That was a fact. That was proven. Now, Duckenfield, what gets me, is walked away from this with his pension and everything else. Now, he can sit there. The reason why I'm saying this is because he was found to a criminal standard of being guilty. And that's to a criminal standard. And yet he's walked away scot-free. Now, that should never, ever happen. It's okay saying organisations should have a duty of conduct. No, I want individuals
yeah,
to be charged criminal charges because they lied and tried to blame 97 innocent people for their own deaths and our supporters for helping to kill them. And yet he lied. He went missing for 2 hours and not one person knew. Where was he? What a load of garbage. We know where he was, but we couldn't say it. He knows where he was, but he lied and lied and lied. And to me, it's an utter disgrace. Individuals, now they're arguing about, well, there's certain types that cannot be charged because of the safety of the if your country. Yeah, okay, I agree with that. But Hillsborough had nothing to do with safety of country. Hillsborough had safety of the people, the fans, the supporters. He should have been brought up. Grenfell, what's that got to do with? Why wasn't individuals charged for Grenfell? We all know what went wrong there. We all know what happened. We all know the ambulance at Hillsborough. The same narrative were kept out because they were saying trouble still going on in the ground. All lies. We all had to put up with that and listen to that. Drunk, ticketless. Now, it's the same thing for other people. Like, you know, as I said earlier on, the contaminated blood, massive cover-up. Nuclear test victims, massive cover-up.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many of them. And it's got to change. And I hope everybody will stay strong, stay together, and let the Prime Minister know if he does not do the right thing, if he does not bloody do the right thing, I am so angry over this. Because how long does it take? As Charlotte said earlier on, 9 years they've had to get this right. Bloody hell, it only takes common sense. It doesn't take Einstein. It takes common sense because they don't want to do the right thing for the people. It's to protect certain people. And that, to me, it's got to stop.
Yeah.
We're the taxpayers. We're paying the money, not them. They're taking our money to protect the people who are bloody guilty.
Yeah.
So me, that's got to change, and I will never rest until it does.
Thank you, Margaret. Lobby, did you have something to add there?
I think not much. I think Charlotte and Margaret have hit the nail on the head. I think I just maybe want to emphasize that I think part of the resistance is because Hillsborough law is so foundational to change. Like,
Yes.
it's not just about telling the truth. I think politicians and institutions can see that if this passes, there is a shifting of power away from them into the hands of the people. And that's why I think there's so much resistance to this law, because this is the on-ramp to the society that we are all, you know, fighting for, which means, you know, it also means for them that they want to minimize this as much as possible because it will snowball and it will start building a future that we want.
Thank you. Pete, did you want to?
Yeah, just very
Yeah.
briefly, just following on what the others have said really, but Lobby's hit the nail on the head there, that the extent of the opposition here is directly related to how successful they think Hillsborough law would be. So we should all take a bit of confidence from the fact that they're being so oppositional to that. And just to reassure Margaret, absolutely the duty of candour is designed to affect individuals as well as organisations. My comments earlier about position statements were just slightly, I was just trying to be quick making them, but absolutely it's designed at making individuals tell the truth as well.
Right, I'm just looking at so there's a question in here from Hillsborough Law now. I think that's Debbie. Are the future inquiries for Southport and now the child abuse inquiry influencing Whitehall, do you think, in terms of the new drafting of the bill? Pete, I don't know whether you've got a view on that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what we've said to government is, look, you know, this Hillsborough, it's not just all or nothing, but it's now. The Southport inquiry is about to start. We want it to apply to the Southport inquiry. I'm sure there are people who are opposed to Hillsborough law who don't want it to apply to Southport.
Yeah.
They want to be in a position where they can not come up with the truth.
There's also a question, I think it's an important point Lucy makes, which is around about the Charter for Bereaved People, which is often used as an example of why we don't need legislation. And of course, the one thing that people forget about the Charter for the Bereaved, this came out of Bishop James's Hillsborough review, is that the Charter is voluntary. It's not mandatory. And I think one of the really important things about Hillsborough law is the fact that it should be a statutory duty with the sanctions. I'm just going to look here. The various comments which I think everybody can see in the chat. And I'll talk in the last couple of minutes about action that we'd like people to make. There's a question and a comment from Joy Francis, who's joining us, who says that she feels honoured to be here and outraged in equal measure. The question is whether the campaign is connected to the Windrush scandal campaigners, and have we got empathetic journalists, media outlets offering support, whether global, majority, local, national or international. I think on the last point, we've got some really dedicated journalists who've done some really brilliant work in trying to help us take the issues here forward. So, but obviously we always need more. So Joy, please make contact. And I know Hillsborough Law had an initial meeting with Windrush campaigners, and I think Windrush is another example of a campaign where people have been appallingly treated and let down, and our objective really is to bring as many campaigns into the fold, because as we all know, this is an issue that affects so many people across different spheres. So let me just have a look. A question about another question here around Lucy's asked what the update is on the independent public advocate. And my answer to that is that I don't know. My understanding was that there were people being interviewed for the job, but there's still not been any progress. But I don't know if anybody else knows.
There's been no update.
No, that's it's like everything. These kind of initiatives come out, and then there's just delay and silence. But we can try and get an update on that. Just before I kind of go to kind of closing, I just want to check there are no other questions that anybody has got. I think I've got everything in the chat, and I'm also being messaged on my phone, so I'm just making sure I'm covering everything. There's a question here. Oh, here we are. Here's a question here around can the campaigners share any tips for organisers or people who are at the start of their journey? Be prepared for a long fight. I would think would be the first thing. Charlotte, you were about to say something.
I think that it's always important to remember that you're the victim and you owe these people nothing, that you don't have to bow down to their rules. If you don't, I remember going to see Grenfell families not long after Grenfell with Pete. We travelled down to London, and one of the things that will always stick out for me is that during the meeting there was a gentleman who was a victim of the fire, and he'd lost family members, and police officers kept calling him because they really wanted him. It was very, very important that he had to sign his witness statement. and he didn't want to sign it because he wasn't happy with the content.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was really becoming, you know, so you could see the anxiety in him. And I was just like, cancel the calls, block the number. You don't have to sign their statement. You're not obliged to sign anything because they tell you to. You owe these people nothing. And the duty is on them to ensure that your voices are heard, things are investigated correctly. That is their job. It's not yours. So I think, you know, don't ever be afraid to say no. Don't ever feel afraid to reach out or just get a second opinion or have somebody read over something for you. Even now, you know, Pete has been Pete's represented me and my family for God knows how many years now. And I still ring Pete and say, please, can I just run this by you? Like, I just want to double check. And it's probably one of the things that I always say to Hillsborough survivors as well is, you know, you're not alone. Please don't ever feel that you can't, you know, reach out and just say to somebody, you know, can I just tell you this, and can you just give me your opinion? Because you need to protect yourself at all times, even when you think that people are on your side, they're probably not.
I think one of the things, Charlotte, that came out so movingly, I guess, from the family listening day was the importance of people coming together and sharing their experiences, sharing their tips, their strategies, and I think that's something that we want to make sure through Hillsborough Law now and through the campaign for Hillsborough Law that we keep that group and just get as many people together as possible to challenge what we know is a very long fight. Now, I'm very conscious there's a couple of minutes left, so I just want to acknowledge Ian Byrne is at the meeting, says it's a brilliant event and contributions which will resonate in Parliament. We need to keep up using every avenue possible to keep the pressure on the Prime Minister to do the right thing. So I just want to kind of just quickly just say some of the things that you can all do to help. One thing that we're going to be doing is circulating an updated briefing of some of the concerns we have with the process and what we're being told. And really, it's an opportunity for people to try and utilise everybody that they know, particularly MPs. We've got some great MPs who are really doing important work in raising this in Parliament, in challenging the government, and we have to keep that up. It's really, really important. Obviously, there's also trade union movement. There are faith groups, there are councillors. I think it's really important that we try and maximise the resources that we have to try and ensure that we make the government aware that, you know, it is all or nothing. And I really think that the Family Listening Day was such an important day in terms of articulating really why Hillsborough Law all or nothing is the only way that we are going to begin to address the injustices that we keep seeing. I want to thank Margaret, Charlotte and Lobby for your ongoing campaigning and the important work that you do, and Pete for everything you do in terms of trying to turn this around so that we have something that we can see as an important both legacy but an important foundation for change moving forward. I just want to give Margaret and Lobby and Charlotte just a minute to say anything that they want to before I close the meeting.
Well, one thing I would like to say, if you don't mind, Debbie, is can we find out how many MPs in Parliament agree to a full Hillsborough Law in all its entirety?
Yeah.
Find out the names of those who don't agree, because I personally, my personal view is every bloody one of them in Parliament should be for this full Hillsborough Law. And those that are not, I have no qualms of naming and shaming them if they don't agree with it. I'd like to know the names of all of them MPs who agree with a full Hillsborough Law in all its entirety. And I think it's important because so much goes on. I have said it to the Prime Minister behind closed doors.
Yeah, yeah.
I am sick of everything getting done behind closed doors. Be open, meet the people who matter. And that, you know, I'm talking about different sections of all these people who've had so much injustice done to them over the years. That be open about it, even if you only meet one person, because too many voices, and I've said it before, doesn't work. It does not work. We've got too many voices going in with different of opinions of different their issues. You can't do it. Have the bullet points from each one. Have a meeting with
I
them
just
all.
wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Charlotte, go. We
Sorry,
have
it's all
what?
breaking up. Sorry.
Go on, Charlotte.
I just wanted to highlight something that Sylvia Rogers has just said there in the chat. She's just put that survivors need full support of Hillsborough Law. If she's referring to Hillsborough survivors, then Hillsborough survivors are also involved in the Hillsborough Law now, including herself and her husband Gary, and we very much so include Hillsborough survivors. They're included within our Hillsborough Law Now campaign.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Lobby, do you want to?
Yeah, just really quickly, I want to say that I think that for inquiries and inquests to work, they have two parts, which is one, finding out what the injustice was and what caused it, and then the second part is doing something about it. And I think the first part is what this Hillsborough Law is about, and I think the second half is maybe where we have something like a national oversight mechanism. But first, we need to make sure that we find out what the injustice was and what caused it. Otherwise, we'll never be able to make the changes we need to make.
Brilliant. So listen, I think you're going to be in no doubt that the people on this call and lots of the people who've been on the webinar are not going anywhere, and that we will be doing our absolute best to make sure that this is all or nothing, that we get the Hillsborough Law that people not only need but deserve. Just picking out the few things that people have said, absolutely, we've got to stay together. We've got to remain united in our determination to see this bill. Its elements we know have already been used in different situations. So we are building a foundation for change. And as Lobby said, we're building for a better tomorrow. And I think that the family listening day, I think for all of us who attended, was just a reminder about the importance of families coming together, campaigns coming together around an important issue. And I feel that only if we have a Hillsborough Law can we begin to address this culture that we see embedded in the state's response to deaths and injustice, and the lack of faith and trust that people have in the establishment. So we will keep everybody on this webinar informed. Check out the inquest website, check out the Hillsborough Law Now website, and we'll be circulating the briefing. And I just want to finally just thank all those who contributed: Margaret, Sue, Charlotte, Lobby and Pete. As ever, your contributions have been absolutely fantastic. And there's lots of nice praise within the chat, which we'll share afterwards in case you didn't get a chance to see it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Oh.